So I'd like to introduce myself this evening. My name is Christine McWilliam, and I'm with the Alzheimer's Society of Alberta and Northwest Territories. I do have a tech support on tonight. Her name is Jennifer Sims. She's joining us from the Grand Prairie area. So any questions that you might have in the chat, please feel free to reach out directly to her, and we'll get a hand handed out. So I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples that call this land home and endeavor to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So just a couple housekeeping items, the usual. We are open. We are still working remotely, unfortunately. We are hoping that we can open our doors soon, but we are just going to still take our direction from Alberta Health at this moment. So if you should need our support, please feel free to call us and reach out. Just like to really take the time to say thank you to everyone this evening for joining us. I know that the virtual space is getting a little bit tiresome, so thank you again for taking time out of your evening to join us tonight. This is one of our last webinars before our summer break, but we do have one more coming up in May, so please keep your eyes peeled in your emails for that information. We are recording, as you had seen at the very beginning, so also please just note that. And this recording will be available on our Assant Cafe at some point, probably later date tomorrow, to review if you'd like. Also, like I had said, please feel free to use the chat section if that's more comfortable for you, and we will get to those questions as well towards the end of the presentation. Right now, people living with dementia need support more than ever, and these are challenging times, and our needs are great. Our services are free of charge, and we're asking that if you're able to help more families receive the support they need, to donate, and there is an opportunity at the end of this presentation to do so. And I thank you for your continued support of us. So now I'm going to take a minute or two to read our guest speaker for this evening. We are very fortunate to have the Honourable Lisa Raitt joining us this evening. Prior to her current role, Ms. Raitt was the President and CEO of the Toronto Port Authority. She was elected into the House of Commons in 2008, where she went on to hold 3 senior portfolios, serving as Minister of Natural Resources, Minister of Labour, and Minister of Transport. Most recently, Ms. Raitt was the Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada. Ms. Raitt holds a Bachelor of Science degree from St. Francis Xavier University and a Master's degree in Chemistry from the University of Guelph. She possesses an LLB from Osgoode Hall Law School and was called to the Ontario Bar in 1998. In 2020, Ms. Raitt was named a Woodrow Wilson Centre Global Fellow of the Canadian Institute. And without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and just double check who is trying to get a hold of me. And thank you very much again tonight, Lisa, for joining us. One of those things, Christine, that never fails, right?
I know your life. That's okay. I thought it was my notifications that were going off, and I'm trying to peer at them on my screen. I couldn't figure them out. So it always happens.
I apologize for that.
Don't worry about it. It's life. I want to thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's nice to hear all the stuff I used to be, but the reality is of who I am predominantly now is I'm Bruce's caregiver, and a lot of us on this Zoom call tonight self-identify first and foremost as a caregiver with somebody who has Alzheimer's, dementia, FTD, Lewy body, something like that. And it's just a function of our lives that we will never, ever be able to forget about, even when our care is over. But it's also not necessarily the worst thing that could happen to you. And then that's kind of what I've learned. It doesn't matter how much you, I guess philosophically, it doesn't matter how much schooling you've had or how much education you've had. What it comes down to in a caregiving situation is how much love you have for the other person. And that's very important, but love can't get you everything. And sometimes you run into situations where you need help. And that's why I was so pleased, Christine, to be able to come on here tonight, because I think that the Alzheimer's Society does such great work when it comes to being that emergency outlet for people who get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, are in a crisis situation, or just simply don't know how to navigate a very complex situation. I will be the first to say that as a former politician, I wouldn't say horrified, but I'm pretty close to saying horrified by the level of bureaucracy and the hoops that we have to go to in order to get good care for our loved ones. And wait times are excruciating, and emergency assistance isn't always available to you. And I'm a classic example of that in terms of what do you do when you have a real emergency. So tonight's topic, ladies and gentlemen, is about emergency preparedness. And I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about, emergency preparedness in the case of, we're talking to folks in Alberta and Northern and the Northwest Territories. And of course, you've had experiences with terrible fires and floods and other things that have happened in your area. And that's a really valid discussion point. What do you do when you're faced with a situation where you need to evacuate? How do you deal with that with a loved one? So I was very happy to see that Alzheimer's Society writ large do have a lot of, I would say, tips and tricks in what you should do in terms of what you should be packing for people, what you should have on hand, how to handle the situation. Where I am in Southwestern Ontario, I have to be prepared for power outages in the wintertime. I don't really have situations of forest fire. I don't have situations of flooding in my part of the world, but I do have to be prepared for lights being out for a long period of time. And I have my emergency kits around, and it takes on a whole new level. But small emergencies can happen as well. And one of the things that I have done in the past when Bruce was in my care personally at home is I always had what was called a go bag. And it's funny, it's kind of a holdover from when I was a minister in Stephen Harper's government. I got great advice in my first year that I should always have a go bag, which meant you always had a bag in your car that had in it had toiletries, it had a change of clothing, it had everything that you needed should you be rushed off to somewhere else in a short period of time and had to go away. And that was always with me on my person. When I became a caregiver for my husband, Bruce, we had a go bag in the car for him in case something would come up. It had different things in it. It had personal protective essentials. It had gloves for me. It had masks. It had eye care. It had Depends. It had a new change of clothing. It had all the things that I would need should we have an emergency when we were out traveling together, or even just going to the grocery store. So tonight, though, we're going to talk about a different kind of emergency preparedness that is something that's not spoken about enough, I think, within our community. And that has to do with violence, because violence can happen in situations where we are providing care to a loved one. And it's a lot different from what is portrayed in the movies. And it's a lot different from what people may think it is from somebody who is weaker or more feeble because they're older or not mobile. I'll tell you a little bit about Bruce. Bruce was 56 years old when he was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's. I was 47 years old. So today it's been 6 years since diagnosis. He's 62 now. And he has transitioned into long-term care. But to get there was a challenge. In 2000, Bruce started to exhibit some pretty drastic behaviors when it came to violence, when it came down to confusion, when it came down to how he expressed his frustration. And as a result, we were very much in fear. My children at the time were younger. They were in their mid-teens, and now they're 20 and 18. And as a result, were witness to all of this. And I had a dual job. I had to make sure that I was protecting Bruce, but also I was protecting my children from what was happening. The first 4 years of Bruce's diagnosis, we filled our bucket list. We did what we could. We traveled, we had friends over, we made plans, we had really good times. And then just one day, it started to go in a direction that I wasn't prepared for, I didn't know about. And that's why I think it's important for me to talk openly about it. If you're wondering if Bruce gives me consent to talk about these things, one of the blessings I have is that we had a very full and frank conversation when he was first diagnosed about what level of openness that he wanted to have in his life when it came to his diagnosis. And he chose himself to be open and to be transparent about what was happening. And he gave me permission at that time. And I have permission now to share what I need. There's a cutoff, though. I am not going to put Bruce in a situation where he would ever be embarrassed or where he would be subject to ridicule. And those things are very important to me. But I do think it's important for folks to get an idea of what they are either facing, or for other folks out there to understand that they're not alone. And that's kind of why I'm very open and very prevalent in media. If you follow media, W5 CTV came and did a documentary. I was very nervous at first, but they showed Bruce as I now know him, which is loving. And they did show the bad times that we had, and that's okay, because the story is that you can get care. I can tell you a little bit more about where we are today, which is not the happy ending that everybody wants to have, but that'll come later. So that's my husband. He was a CEO. He was a scratch golfer. He rode a motorcycle. He drove fast cars. He had a boat. He could fix anything you ever wanted. And little by little, all those things were taken away from him. And to be honest, I didn't notice at first. It was only brought to my attention that he had a problem when work was complaining about the fact that he was not performing and that he was in danger of losing his job. And I said to him, you really should go to the doctors and find out what's going on. And he went, and I was lucky enough that his GP was cognizant that this could be a problem for him. And he sent him to a specialist, and we got a diagnosis far more quickly than anybody else did. But I also think that Bruce was far advanced by the time we went to a doctor. So that's Bruce's story, part one. Let me tell you a little bit about part two. And these are the things to watch for as you go through your own progress or process with a loved one. The good news is that not everybody has to deal with these kinds of incidents. Not everybody is going to have behavioral, neurological issues, which is what Bruce ended up having and still has to this day. For a lot of folks, their issues with Alzheimer's remain to be things that are manageable within the home. Yes, you're going to have extra care. And yes, you're going to have issues with incontinence, and you're going to have issues with mobility, and you're going to have issues with feeding, but you don't necessarily have the issues with psychosis and delusions and violence. We were not that lucky. One of the first things I noticed was Bruce's inability to recognize me. And the terminology for that is called Capgras syndrome, where he thought I was an imposter. He would see me, he knew he had a wife, but he didn't know it was me. He couldn't figure out that I was her. And I remember clearly being in a car with him, driving home to our house. And he turned to me in the car and he said, listen, lady, you can't come to my house because my wife is there and she's going to be very mad at you if you come in. So I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're not coming in my house. And he would physically try to keep me from going into my house. It's very disconcerting and very surprising. In a situation like that, the best thing you can do is let them go in the house by themselves. I know that sounds dangerous, but it's far better for you to stay in the car, to stay outside. If they're telling you to stay outside, stay outside. And the reason being is that it's extremely upsetting and frustrating for them, and they're not going to snap out of it right away. They may eventually. However, the odds are is that they'll just get more and more upset and strike out at you as a result. So Capgras syndrome was one of the first things that we encountered. About 6 months after that, and it was sporadic. It happened on Christmas morning. He went to my neighbors and he said, I don't know who this lady is in my house. Can you please go and get rid of her? And it happened a couple of times after that with my son. But as I said, sporadic, but it was almost like something wasn't connecting in his head. The second part, though, was when Bruce started to see his image in reflective surfaces and think it was a friend. Although it was definitely him, he thought it was a friend, and he would chat for hours, actually, with this guy and have a conversation and laugh and tell stories. And he would tell me about this guy and how great he was and how much he enjoyed him. And to be honest, I thought, this is super. He's got somebody to talk to. He's not getting into trouble. I know where he is in the house. This is all great. And that's the way it was for a couple of weeks. And then the friend that he thought he had turned not to be his friend. And Bruce became scared of him and was frustrated that everywhere he looked, this guy was there. And as a result, he started fighting with him and wanted him out of the house. And that's when I was advised, and I did, take down all the mirrors in the house, and I covered up reflective surfaces. So I ordered online from Amazon this kind of sticky stuff that you put over your windows. I had a lot of windows in the house, and I covered them all up. It wasn't enough. And he became agitated and violent when it came to the guy. This was the summer of 2020, just after we were locked down in COVID. And he ripped some doors off the wall because he didn't like the guy in the window that he was looking at. He punched holes in the wall. He was extremely agitated. He could see the reflection in our truck window, and he took the garden shears and was banging on the door in order to get him to go away. And all of this was fine. And I know it sounds odd, but the violence wasn't turned towards me, and it wasn't turned towards my children. So it was fine. And I thought, okay, this is all manageable. We'll redirect. It'll go away. It'll stop, and I'll calm him down. But then one day it actually does turn on you. And I remember talking to a geriatric psychiatrist, and I was telling him about the situation I was going through. And I said, what should I do? What's your advice? How do I deal with this? And he said, well, you need to remove all the knives from your house. You need to remove all firearms from your house. You need to have your cell phone with you at all times charged. You need to know where the keys to your car are at all times. And you need to know that you're able to get out of the house. And I was floored that was the advice that a geriatric psychiatrist who treats Alzheimer's patients, that was the advice I was given. It wasn't about what can I do for my husband? How do I manage him better? It was about how to protect myself from harm. And I thought, that's never going to happen to me. I'm not going to worry about it. Interesting. But then one night I woke up and there was a butcher's knife underneath my bed. And I thought, well, that's interesting and odd. He then started taking tools from his shed into our room. He was having delusions of the fact that I was doing things that he didn't like. He was having hallucinations of other people who were in the house. And it was extremely difficult. So I reached out to his doctor and I said, I really do need some help. And it was during COVID, as I said, so we didn't have the option of going into the hospital or going in to see a doctor. And his suggestion was that we try restraining. So physically, he was restrained in a sense by me making sure that there was a locked room that I could go to, that I always carried certain things with me, like, as I said, my keys and a fully charged cell phone at all times, and that the police knew that I had a husband who had Alzheimer's that was prone to violence, so that in case of an emergency, they knew what they were dealing with. So I did all those things. But as well, we chose to try to figure out how to help him from a medication point of view. And I wish I could tell you that it worked, but it didn't. And we went through 7-8 months of trying different medications and different drugs. And to be honest, it didn't help at all. It just made him dopier. It made him sleepier. It caused him to fall more. And the reality is that what he had, we couldn't treat via telephone calls. He really needed full-on service within a hospital unit, but there was no room. And there was no way for him to get onto the list and into care quickly because there's such a long waiting list. And that's the case for most things. And probably a lot of you are nodding your heads right now about that. So my sons and I just realized we were going to have to deal with it. At Christmas of 2020, it had come to a head. He was just randomly throwing punches at me and my kids. He threatened to kill us all the time. He tried to kick the family dog, and it was becoming too much. And on New Year's Day, he made a motion and a movement to force me or push me through a window in our house. And I knew that I would be seriously harmed, and I knew my kids would get involved. So I called 911. And 911 showed up, and the cops showed up, and I met the police officer at the door, and I said, listen, I just wanted to let you know, my husband has Alzheimer's, and please do not do anything to hurt him. He doesn't know what he's doing. He is just acting out. And the officer sergeant said, we understand, Ms. Raitt. We know what he has. It's on the directory. It's on our notification. I have some experience in this area, so don't worry about it. I was still worried about it though, because I didn't know what they would do to interact with him, because you hear horror stories. And we know there are terrible stories about this. So they thought they could softly restrain him, and they tried to take his blood pressure, and he ripped all the cuffs off, and the EMT was extremely nervous and extremely scared. And I can't blame him for being that way, because my husband's a big guy. He's 6'2", and he's about 250 pounds. And when all else failed, they literally had to take handcuffs and handcuff him to the bed as they wheeled him into the ambulance. And he struggled so hard that he caused himself to have a heart attack. And they treated that and brought him into the hospital. And this is the hard part, but I want you to know this because I know you're caregivers. When we went to the hospital, he went to the hospital. I did not go in to see him right away because it was a lot for us to digest at home, what we had just experienced for the last couple of weeks. And as well, I couldn't visit him because of COVID. They weren't allowing visitors to come in. But on the Saturday, the next day, they called me and said, we need you to come in because we can't control him. And I knew that was going to happen. And indeed, I go in, and their way of working with Bruce was he didn't have any clothes on except for incontinence brief, a diaper essentially. And he was naked other than that. And they had him tied to the bed in a 3-point restraint, one arm and two legs restrained. And they had been giving him significant amount of Haldol to calm him down. So when I came in, it was a very big shock for me to see him like that, but it showed me that people don't know how to deal with it. And that was the way that they were going to deal with it in an emergency ward. Let me just fast forward to tell you this. He ended up a couple of weeks later getting into the behavioral unit at Baycrest. They detoxed him from the drugs he was on. They found a new mix that worked for him. He was successful in transitioning out of Baycrest after 13 months. He was placed in a behavioral support unit. He's there now. He's been there since February 12th of this year, and he's regressed. And he's back to behaviors that are not manageable by the staff. So we're back at square one in a sense, and I'm waiting to see what ends up happening. What can you do to help? Call 911 if you have to, because if you have to, you have to. If you need to work with a hospital, then my best advice is to find the best people that you possibly can, and to go online and work with the Alzheimer's Society to try to find the best help that you can to do so. These are very extreme and very concerning cases, but it doesn't mean that there isn't treatment out there and that there isn't help for you to get. The other option is, of course, is that, which is happening in my case, which is you just wait out the disease. At some point, my husband will become immobile, and then his tendencies for reaction are going to be less, and he'll be more manageable, and his size and his weight is not going to be issue. The last thing I'd let you know, and it's not a downer, but it's more a reminder for those of us who are working in public policy and who advocate. And I know there's some people out there who do that. And I thank you for tuning in tonight. Building spaces for folks like Bruce and Alzheimer's patients in general is extremely important in our society. And I'm always happy when I hear that we're building more spaces. But training is far more important. And we just don't have the training in Canada that other countries provide to their caregivers, to their workers. I mean, I think in some cases, caregivers who watch videos from Tifa Snow are far more advanced, or from the Alzheimer's Society, on how to deal with certain situations, are even times more trained than the personal care workers on behavioral support units, quite frankly, because they're just so busy that they don't have the time for that kind of training. And it's remarkable for me to see that. And it's really scary for me to say that we need to make sure that we have some really smart training happening for those who are working with people with behavioral issues. And the last part I would say is something that's come to my attention most recently, and that has to do with, I told you specifically about the situation where I had to call 911 for Bruce. Let's say that it didn't go the way that it went. Let's say that I had a completely different situation, that I call 911, Bruce reacts violently, somebody who doesn't understand dementia arrives at my door, Bruce takes a swing at him, which is what happened in my case, and the police officer decides to arrest him on the spot. And maybe it becomes even worse. Maybe there's a firearm in the house, and maybe that their shots are fired and it becomes a standoff. This really happens in our lives, and the legal system doesn't recognize to the point that it needs to, that dementia has an impact and an influence on people, and they should not be in the system. They should not be. They are accountable for their crimes, and they're accountable for their doings. But the other side of it is that they just really don't understand what they're doing. And dementia is very real. And I think, unfortunately, the younger people who are diagnosed, and the fitter people are, and the healthier people are with these diagnoses, more and more we're going to be seeing that situation if there are behavioral symptoms. And I just want you to put yourself in the shoes of your loved one. You know, they are confused. They don't know what's going on. There's people coming at them. There's noises they don't like. They're frustrated. They don't recognize anybody, and their natural instinct is to fight. And they don't understand what a police officer is. And they think that somebody is there to hurt them. So that, to me, is another aspect of emergency preparedness. And what you need to do there is you need to call your police and tell them that you have somebody with this ailment at your address, and that they may be violent, but you should treat them as somebody with dementia and not as somebody who is going to harm them. So I guess, Christine, I've gone through the whole story that I can. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry if I took too much time. I'm a former politician, ladies and gentlemen. I can talk forever, but nonetheless, I want more to hear from what you guys have to say, and lovely to hear your questions, and great to hear from you all. And I know I have a friend on here as well, that from a great group called UQuest, which I think is a really fantastic organization. I'm going to give props to it, that allows people with young onset dementia have a place to go and an outlet for their expression of physicality. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, thank you again, Lisa, for sharing a few points that, maybe I'll give people a chance to, as you said earlier, digest that information. And think of some questions that people might have. I mean, now is definitely your opportunity to ask away. You've definitely been very open and honest with your story, and I think it's just very appreciated in a topic like this, because you're absolutely right, it just isn't discussed very often.
Mhm.
And so a few things I wanted to point out in terms of what the society can offer. I do think you've made some excellent points around the consent piece for Bruce, and you both having that conversation while he was able to have that conversation. And I think that's just a really important piece for people to kind of keep in mind. That goes for a few areas as well in terms of just general life planning. And we say it quite often at the society that, you know, having those pieces in place early are absolutely key. And that's definitely a really great point that I'm glad you pointed out. Even the police knowledge as well, just letting your local police know that this is what's going on. And if there is a phone call, I do see you have a question of sort of about that maybe we'll address in a moment, as well as just the training and the gaps in the healthcare system. You know, there again, I know you're in Ontario, but Alberta has definitely seen that, especially over COVID, which I'm going to say a lot of the care partners and families and friends of people living with dementia can speak to that, or definitely agree that it's been a big piece over the last 2 years for us that we've seen as well.
Yeah.
The society does have a safety planning toolkit. We don't make it available just for a few reasons, but we are more than happy to share that with people. If they are interested in finding out more details about that, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm going to get as well my tech support to post that W5 interview, because I personally watched it myself and it was great. It was, there again, just a really nice example of your story and how you highlight the good parts and the bad parts and how you're moving forward with that. So yeah, anyways, thank you very much. And like I said, if people would rather use their microphone, please, if you could use the reaction button to raise your hand. It should just be along your bottom. I'm just going to look on my own screen. Yeah, just on your bottom of your toolbar, and you can put up your hand or a thumbs up or anything like that, and then we'll know you have a question.
So Christine, we have a question from Harry
Yes.
in the chat, which is a really important one. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw your W5 piece and just want to say thank you. It was so eye-opening to watch and appreciate your candor. I've thought about calling the police before in my own situation, but I felt guilty to do it. Any advice on how to get past this?
Yeah, I felt the same way too, Harry. So the first time I've called 911 twice. So the first time I called, it was because he had taken the truck and disappeared. And I was terrified he was going to kill somebody. And I was calling 911 to ask them to go and find him for me. And he ended up pulling in the yard before they actually arrived. But it was a wake-up call that I needed to call. I'm sorry, I called 3 times. The second time I called, I actually didn't call 911. I called a hotline that had been provided to me. And that hotline, because of COVID, actually went to, in Ontario, our telehealth group, which is our, I guess, 311, or I don't know what the similarity is for Alberta. But I ended up with a nurse. And as I explained to her the health situation we were in, she said, you got to go to 911. And she just sent me to 911. So I thought I was getting advice from the Alzheimer's Society. That turned into telehealth. And then I ended up getting the police, who showed up, took him to the hospital. And the hospital couldn't do anything for him. And they said they discharged him into my care. And that was fine because they didn't know what to do. That's the problem. Emergency care in small towns do not know what to do with dementia patients. And then the third time I called was because I was in personal danger. And I knew that if there was an escalation, somebody in my house would get hurt. And Harry, here's the thing. If it was just me in the house that day, I probably wouldn't have called. I'm going to be honest with you. I probably would have thought I can take this and I'm going to try to protect him. And instead, I had my 16-year-old with me, I had my 19-year-old with me, and I had my 19-year-old's girlfriend in the house as well. And I was really worried about them getting hurt. And that's why I called 911, to protect them, not to protect myself. And quite frankly, that's dumb. I should value my health and my safety as much as I valued the protection of the kids. And I invite you to protect yourself as well, too. You're worth it. You're worth it. And honestly, it's about getting your loved one better care and into a better system as well. Because living the way he was living was terrible for Bruce. Just terrible. He was tormented. He was so unhappy. And if you watch W5, it's taken a long time. It's taken 14 months, but he does have a much better quality of life.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and you definitely do touch on that in that interview, and that's also really something really important to consider as well for the person. Mm-hmm. Exactly, their quality of life is no better than yours to some degree in that type of environment.
Yeah, exactly.
I do see my tech support also put there are some enhanced care units in Alberta, just for people to note. There's one up in Grand Prairie, Mackenzie Place. I'm not sure if that's in Edmonton or in Grand Prairie as well. Villa Caradas in Edmonton, and then our Pinoca, which is in the central zone. Yeah. But obviously, please always feel free to reach out if you have any more questions about that. The link to the W5 interview is there as well. I'm still not seeing any hands raised. So
that's okay. Christine, that's okay. I would say that the Alzheimer's Society does have a really good, if you're looking for a handout on what to do, as I said, in case of an emergency, a natural disaster in your area, you do have really good resources to make sure that you have a checklist of what you need to carry and what you need to have on hand. And it's serious. It's good to keep that stuff in mind, depending upon where you are in your, I guess, journey with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely another good, a good reminder. Even your go bag idea is a good one as well. That can be applied to a lot of different situations.
I got that from a caregiver. I never thought about having it for Bruce, and she said, no, you should have it in the back seat of the car. Mm-hmm. Comes in handy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a couple other questions for you that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if people are maybe still thinking what they might want to ask. So during your political career, because they kind of overlapped, did they not?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay. So Bruce, I was still a minister in 2013 when I should have noticed the signs of Alzheimer's, and I didn't. As I said, I didn't notice because I would be away from the house from Monday to Thursday. I would come home on the weekend. But like clockwork on Tuesdays, he would call me and be extremely upset and be saying things that I thought just didn't make any sense. And he stopped coming to see me in Ottawa. And I thought, gee, this is really strange. He used to drive up, he would fly up, he would come and visit, he would go to events with me. And little by little, he just didn't want to do those things anymore. And I was extremely upset. The 2015 election was extremely difficult because he didn't want to have to do anything to do with it. I was lucky that I won my seat. I did not win in 2019. He got diagnosed in 2016. And quite frankly, at that point, I went to Andrew Scheer, who was the leader at the time. And I said, I don't think I can be there 4 days a week. Can I come in, 2 days a week to Ottawa and then just do the rest remotely? And he said, yeah, that's no problem at all. So I was able to do that. And thank goodness. I mean, if I had been a minister, I will tell you flat out, I would have had to resign. No way could I have done the level of care that I needed to provide for him. Even though he didn't need hands-on care, having a diagnosis like Alzheimer's when you're a young couple, and I like to think that in our 50s we're young, you only have so many months, days, good days. So I would be there and I would say to myself, do I want to go to these 4 community events on a Saturday, or do I want to spend one of the last good Saturday nights I'll have with my husband at a movie theater? Guess what's going to win? Every single time that's going to win. I was in opposition, so I had the latitude to just focus on my constituency, which included my husband. If I had been a minister, no way I could have done it. I would have had to have resigned. I know that.
Mhm.
It's scary to think about it that way, but it would have been definitely the decision. There's no way around it. There's no way I could have left him alone for the periods of time I would have had to leave him alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Besides Andrew Scheer, were you comfortable sharing with any of your colleagues, or did you? And kind of, if
No.
so, why or why not? No.
No. First of all, he didn't want to tell anybody, and I respected his wish. I ended up outing myself on World Alzheimer's Day when I did a statement in the House of Commons about the importance of caregivers. And on the last line, my voice cracked and I cried a little bit. And Don Martin, who some of you may remember was a reporter, he wrote me right after that and he said, "What's up with you, Raitt? Why did you cry? You never cry. What's going on? What's in your life? Is everything okay?" And that's when I said to Bruce, I think it's time that we start talking about this because I can't keep it in. I can't keep the secret because it's too important. And he agreed with me and he said, "I have no shame and we're going to talk about this now." And he called Don and he said, "We'll come on your show." And he disclosed to Canada that he had this disease.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's just interesting. I was just curious to ask that question, just given that I know they're again in lots of situations, especially when someone is diagnosed younger, it kind of, can go one of two ways. You're either the Roger Marples of this world, which
we love Roger. We love Roger.
Which some of you may also know, he's been a huge advocate for this space since his own personal diagnosis. Yeah. And sometimes people just prefer to stay private. So I was just more curious.
No, it's okay. And Bruce's issue, the kind of one of the first impacts for Bruce was aphasia. So it was more than just word searching. He lost the ability to speak and he doesn't speak well. And that was an embarrassment for him. So communication was gone and he isolated himself. So it was difficult for him to talk about it. But once we started discussing it and he was able to advocate, we came out, as you know, we came out to Red Deer and we had a wonderful round table. And those are moments that I'll always treasure, having him do his thing as an advocate himself. He couldn't do it for a long time, but he was good.
Well, but that just goes to show, and just a quick brief moment, I did meet Lisa back in 2018 when her and Bruce had come out here, and even just a small piece of advocacy can now turn into something like this, that, we have the ability to share with more people here in Alberta and more of our families and care partners and things like that. So
yeah,
a small contribution that's gone a long way.
Thanks.
But it looks like you do have one more question.
Cool.
From June, could you predict when Bruce was going to become aggressive?
Yeah, I could see it. So as you probably know, we all have this thing called sundowning, right? We all know what sundowning is. Around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our loved one may start getting a little bit more agitated, may start a little bit more pacing. I found it really had to do with the time of day for Bruce. And later in the afternoon was the danger time, for sure. And it would start at about 2 and maybe it would end at 7. And it would be agitation and pacing. And that's predominantly when I would take the video that I've taken some of. Also, when he progressed further, he would be up all night, just up all night, pacing around the house. And that was also a danger point in terms of violence, because that was frustration. So at the very beginning, it went from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to about 7 o'clock in the evening. And then after that, it just became 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 in the morning. And then it was 24/7. It was just all the time. You never knew when he was going to lash out at you. But at the end, it was constant brooding and constant worry. But June, I will tell you one thing. I had a lovely caregiver who would come and give me respite by taking Bruce to Tim Hortons. And she stopped coming because one day Bruce just, in a flash, turned on her and kind of shoved her up against the wall at Tim Hortons. And she said, I can't do this, Lisa. He scared me. And I said, absolutely. I fully understand it. And she didn't see it coming. And she was She was an experienced caregiver. And it just, in that moment, he turned. And that's the danger of all of this, right? Because you just don't know when they're going to go too far. And they're strong, they're powerful. My 16-year-old said in the W5 interview that it's almost like he had super strength. And it really was. The amount of damage he did to my house, I had to file a claim with my homeowner's insurance. That's how much damage he did. Yeah, floors, walls, ceilings, doors, everything. He wrecked it.
June had a follow-up question as well for you. Did you find that Bruce had triggers in the same things that would also calm him?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Yes. So his triggers were loud noises, still are. Loud noises bothered him. Lots of chattering bothered him then and bothers him now. Loud television would bother him. Frustration. The guy in the mirror that I told you about earlier, that was a trigger. And then at the end, I was his trigger. So I told you about how he was in the hospital restrained when I went to visit him. I convinced the security guard to let him be unrestrained and let him up. And I was going to put his pajamas on him. And the minute he was free, he grabbed me and he wanted to hurt me. And the security guard and another nurse came in and tore him off. I was his trigger at that point. I'm not his trigger anymore. His trigger now is mainly loud noises, which happens when you're on a floor with lots of other people who are suffering from dementia.
Yeah, and that is very true. You do mention that in the W5 interview, that because he's so much younger as well, that it's hard to navigate what's the appropriate environment for him. Well,
it's true, but on the unit he's on, Christine, just so people know, 20 beds on the unit he's on, behavioral support unit, 50% of them are people who are under this age of 65. 50% under 65. Young onset Alzheimer's, and there's some people who are in their 40s in this unit, and they are only there because they came from the hospital where they had to be treated first before they got to behavioral supports. And it's so heartbreaking to see. It's heartbreaking. And then the rest of them are just, people who are in their late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, so it is a bit more of a range in age.
Yeah, it's the older ones are the more loud. The younger ones are pretty much much like Bruce now, don't say many words. Not loud, they're just there.
Wow. Well, and that's is that still at Bayshore? Is that correct?
They're at Baycrest, yeah. So he's in the long-term care part of Baycrest, and it's attached to the hospital.
Okay, I feel like our equivalent might be our Centennial Center in Ponoka. They do tend to have smaller units for people to be on, to live and get a little bit more one-to-one care. Yeah, just for people to note if that's true. Yeah, we're here in Alberta. Oh, I see we have a question. Someone who would like to unmute. Go ahead, Josie.
Hi, I'm just wondering about something. My mom is 88 and she lives in a long-term care facility. I did talk to the administrator and the administrator said, if you don't like it here, you can always move her. Where do we move people? Like mom has got no filter. She says things to people that are not very nice. And of course, people, I don't think people in a small town are really trained to deal with people with Alzheimer's. And that really bothers me because she needs to be somewhere, but there's a lot of young people working there. And I'm not saying young people aren't good, but if she says something mean to them, they hold it against her, and the care that she gets is not good. And it's really frustrating. Like we don't know where she should be, where to put her, because she absolutely has no filter. Like if she doesn't like what you're wearing, she'll literally tell you, why are you wearing that ugly shirt or something? And she gets, I just feel she's not in a great place. And when the administrator said to me, you can take her somewhere else, where
Yeah,
do you
that
take
doesn't help. Josie, is there a social worker associated with the long-term care facility?
Actually, I've just started talking again with the another person there, and he said because of COVID, they've had a lot of cuts there.
Mm,
But he says eventually they're going to start getting more people in. So I'm
very
going
good.
down to see her on Friday to see if we can arrange some, I don't know, one-on-one
That's good.
assistance
That's
for
good.
her, because she's not good in a large setting. Like if they go to play bingo or whatever, she's not interested. She just won't be
Yeah.
a part of it.
I know.
So, and it's frustrating because I feel bad for her, and I really find it hard to visit because she's not happy.
I know. But it's too much care probably for you at home, like it was for me.
Oh, yeah, there's no way, like she's gotten to food fights and
Yeah. Yeah. No,
different
I
things
know.
that you just can't control things
Yeah.
as a single person, right?
Oh, yeah. So she has behavioral issues that need to be treated in a way in which trained people can deal with, but the training is missing in so many
Yeah.
of the long-term care homes. It's true. 100% true.
So how do you know where to take them?
Well, so listen, I'm not going to get, I can't give you the answer to that. And I'm probably going to depress you when I tell you this, but even the top rated behavioral support unit in Ontario can't handle my husband. And I've had to hire somebody to come in to keep him out of trouble 3 days a week when I can't go.
Okay.
So I've hired private care to come on the floor 6 hours a day, 3 days a week to be with him, to keep him from getting to the point where my fear is that they actually ask him to leave. I'm more worried about him being asked to leave than I am about trying to figure out a new place for him. So that's how I've dealt with it. I've dealt with the issue by providing extra care because I can. I'm blessed, but other people just don't have that ability.
Yeah.
That's unless you can, you can't be there the whole time either. But I would honestly suggest trying to find somebody in the system who is a social worker, because somebody has to be in that part of the world where they can work with your mom and try to find things that are good for her through recreational therapy or through some other way.
They seem to think that the best way is to just send her to her room so she can lay down. And she gets absolutely no exercise unless we come to take her for a walk. And even that, it's hard, when a person goes and lays down every day and doesn't do any exercise, when we come to go take her for a walk, she's going, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And it's like pulling chicken's teeth. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Like I said to the guy, I said, we need to get her on an exercise program where we have to tell her, Mom, well, they'll call her Lizzie. Her name is Elizabeth. Lizzie, we have to go for a walk today.
Mm.
Even short little stints, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to watch her.
I understand.
Fade away.
I understand. And unfortunately, all we can do is work with the team that we have in place at the long-term care unit and be understanding of their constraints, and then just try to help and make suggestions for them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josie, for asking your question. We always appreciate that. Another just quick piece of advice. I do agree with Lisa, is doing the best to work with the team in place. If possible, if you wanted to reach out privately to the society, we could maybe try and look for some alternative solutions with you for one-on-one, one-on-one with possibly with the care home, or with maybe, just trying to see how we could help support you. But you do have one more question in the chat, Lisa.
Super.
When you mean they're loud, do you mean screaming or hollering and goes on for hours?
Exactly. Yeah, it's when the other patients, other clients are in distress, and they can be very loud and they're not quiet, and it upsets him and it bothers him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, understandably so. When you think about a person who's living with dementia, if they,
Mhm.
have trouble recognizing a police officer, as you mentioned earlier, trying
Yeah,
to distinguish where noises are coming from and why they won't stop,
yeah,
it is a lot of complex thinking for someone.
yeah. And it's interesting. So, I mean, everybody on this floor has dementia, one shape or form, and
Mhm.
some manifest in one way and others manifest in another. So the phrase, if you've seen one case of Alzheimer's, you've seen one case of Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
They're all very different.
That statement could not ring truer. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do see someone also just asked a question. It looks like she was maybe a little late to join us this evening. Betty, what training is available for a caregiver to learn how to deal with behavior issues?
Yeah. There's lots of resources out there. And I'm sure you guys have resources, Christine, that you can point people in
Yeah.
the right direction. For me, I found going online to a practitioner called TEPA, TEEPA Snow, who does know how to deal with behavioral issues and works with caregivers to show you ways in which to deal, which are great. But if you're dealing with a behavioral issue that is a delusion or a hallucination, it's a very different level than dealing with somebody who says all the time, I want to go home, even though they're in their home, right? She gives you tips on how to deal with that, the I want to go home part, and she'll act it out. And there's also another group called Care Blazers, CAREBLAZERS. She's a psychologist. She's got some really great YouTube videos as well in dealing with this stuff. I found them to be helpful, and it has kind of amended how I work with Bruce now that he has the right medication. But Betty, in some cases, people can only be helped by having antipsychotics to deal with the severe hallucinations that they're having. And that's my husband's case.
Yeah, and absolutely, Lisa. I think you definitely made another great point about there definitely is a difference, and there's different ways to approach someone who's asking to go home often, as opposed to somebody exactly who's having a major delusion that cannot be fixed with a redirection method or a
Right.
changing a topic. It's more than that, for sure.
Yeah. And pray for patience, because my God, we need a lot of patience. We need a lot of patience for this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another very good point. So I'm noticing our time. I do have one kind of, or I guess two kind of final questions.
Yeah.
If people would like to still take the chance to put anything else in the chat or raise their hand,
I'm good.
We'll leave that open for the next few minutes. Back to kind of speaking about, just kind of wrapping up the conversation, you did talk about a go bag. Did you ever have a full safety plan in place for yourself? Is that something you would recommend moving forward for people from tonight's conversation?
Looking back, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, yes. Because I never believed that my husband could hurt me until the moment came when he could hurt me. And my only thing that I could do at that point was call 911, which I did, which is part of the care plan. But you should think about, are there other resources out there before 911? Yeah. I don't know whether or not you have any services attached to your police that are more for mental health issues, because maybe sometimes they're the ones that you're going to call. The Alzheimer's Society may have a hotline you can call nationally. Those things are important. You know what, though, Christine, I just thought of something that I learned of when I was in one of the groups that I do for my own self. I belong to a lot of chat groups, but a great idea. Don't forget that you're important as well. Meaning, let's say you're out of the house for the day and something happens to you and your loved one's at home. How is anyone going to know that your loved one has Alzheimer's at home? So the idea is you yourself carry some kind of bracelet, identification, something along those lines that indicates that if something, God forbid, something happens to you when you're out of the house, that they know you have somebody that you look after in your house that has dementia, and that they should go and check up on them. because it's not obvious. And I never thought about that. I never thought about anything like that at all. But that's, for me, is a really safety and emergency that you don't anticipate that could happen to you. I have a dear friend of mine who told me about his mom had young onset, and he wanted to make sure that I understood that I had to look after myself, because his father unfortunately died of a heart attack before his mother was placed in a long-term care home. And he always says, it was the caregiving that ended up taking his father to an early grave. And this is a reality. This is a reality we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. I personally can't say I've heard of many people suggesting something like that, but that's absolutely true, especially in the case of somebody who is diagnosed with young onset or early onset. You would go to the door and you'd think, oh, well, they must be more than capable, as opposed to if you walk to the door and you see somebody who's maybe using a walker or a cane, or just immediately the visual one gets. So that's a really great tip.
Yeah, that there's somebody at home. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I do see there again, my tech support did put in our one of our resources about emergency preparedness, preparing for an emergency department to visit.
Good.
A couple different pieces there. I think the last thing I just wanted to ask, Lisa, what's next for you? What's next for you and Bruce? I know you had said he might need to maybe change where he's living. What for you?
So as I said, Bruce is resisting care again, and he won't let nurses or care workers approach him to change him or to facilitate cleaning. He closes his door and he doesn't let them in, and it's very disruptive for them on the unit. And we are having team meetings to figure out what to do. So I don't know if he's going to end up back on the hospital wing. I hope not, but unfortunately, the option right now for him that's been chosen is he is going to have his medicine increased, which is going to make him more sedated because they don't know how to deal with him. And that's a case of, there's a whole lot of problems there. Like that has to do with lack of training, not enough resources on the floor. And maybe, Christine, my goal in life is to try to help fix that. I don't know what that means or what that looks like, but I'm going to try, and we'll see where I end up with that. But in the meantime, now that COVID has lifted and there's more liberal visitation ability, Bruce is reconnecting with other members of his family, which is really nice. And he's having visits from, family who live out in Spruce Grove, family that live out in Halifax, and they're flying in to see him, which I think is really important and a good time. And he really enjoys the visit. So that's what's next for him right now. And I'm going to spend a lot of time with him this summer. And I mean, we're coming to the end of our journey together. I know I only probably have a limited time where he is going to recognize me and know who I am. He doesn't know we're married. He giggles when I tell him we're married, but he's happy to hold my hand. So that's okay. And he knows he likes having me around. And I just want to maximize the amount of time I have with him until I lose him, because I will, as we all know, we lose our loved ones. But in the meantime, for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to meet every Thursday night with the support group that I've been talking to for the last 3 years. And I'm grateful every minute of the day that I have them to sound out and to have conversations and learn things about wearing proper bracelets and hearing them express things that I feel, so that my own feelings are validated. So if you're out there and you want to have a group, you can find them out there. You can do it online if you don't want to talk to actual people. Maybe you guys have something that happens on a monthly basis. But if you go online, you can find places that are more frequent, and you should try to figure that out.
Yeah. And once again, you just brought up a bunch of really great points. Once again, we are still closed for in-person groups, but we do have 4 or 5 running virtually right now.
Perfect.
There again, regardless of which province or territory you do live in, you can always reach out to any society. And I think that is a valid point too, Lisa. The Ontario Society for you and folks online here, Alberta and Northwest Territories, always reach out, even if it's just a simple question. this actually kind of might segue well into our final webinar for the season is an Ask Me Anything. So we have a doctor and one of our seasoned Alzheimer employees coming back to answer anything, talk about anything. So please feel free to sign up for that one. But tonight, there again, Lisa, thank you so much. This has been very informative and very eye-opening in a good way, and great to start a conversation. You know, just to not be so timid of the fact that this is happening. This is a reality for lots of families, and it you know, it just needs to be discussed more. People need to know what to do or where to go and how to support themselves.
Yeah, it's true. And, you know, at the top, I mentioned UQuest. UQuest is a great example of a group of people that recognized a gap and cared enough about their loved ones that they came up with something that was good for them. And that just shows you the power across the country of trying to do that. It's, you know, sometimes you got to take it upon yourself.
Absolutely. And I do see that person online here. If they would like to drop their information in the chat, that would be great. You know, you can always use extra resources and support. Oh, well, yeah, I guess thanks again, Lisa. I think, you know, hopefully maybe we will see you more in this space and in more of a advocacy role. And not that you aren't already doing that, but I think we would be very lucky to have you just with your given political experience. And yeah, if there's no other questions this evening from everyone, I'll say good night and thank you once again.
Good luck, everybody. Take care of yourselves.